Did you ever experience, as a student, being left in the classroom without the teacher? They might have said, now here are the instructions, here, I want you to do this work while I'm out. I'll just be gone a few minutes, but I want you to all behave yourself. How did that turn out? Some of you may have thought, our class was great. Some of you, utter chaos. If you can imagine that scene, you can kind of get a sense of where we are in Israel's story as we work our way through the big picture. And we come to the book of Judges. Now that name is a little confusing because when we think of a judge, what do you think? You think of a person in a robe, they're sitting there, they're deciding who's right, who's wrong. But these judges are really more deliverers. If they're judging anyone, they're judging Israel's enemies. So we're not going to be able to go through the whole book, but I want to just kind of take one person from this story to kind of give you an illustration of what the book is about. Because that's what we're trying to do with this year-long series is help you kind of know what's in there, how to read it, and go through that. But where are we in time frame? So, we started way back in August. We looked at the creation event, Adam and Eve, Noah's Ark, and that story. And then we saw the calling of Abraham, and then his son Isaac, and then Isaac's son Jacob. And God is forming this family. The end of Genesis finds Jacob's family, his 12 sons, and everybody's with them down in Egypt, where they eventually are enslaved by the Egyptians. And after about a 400-year period, they are led out of Egypt by Moses, who God miraculously called to come and do this. And you had the Red Sea event, and then they worked their way up to this land that God had promised to Abraham and his descendants. But when they got there, and it didn't take them very long, when they got there, the majority of the people said, too scary, can't do it, why don't we just go back to Egypt? And so God said, you know what, I'm going to let this generation die out, and then I'll take in some people who will follow me, who will trust me. And that's what happened over about a 4-year period. And then eventually Joshua takes over from Moses and leads the people into what we sometimes call the conquest, to take over the land. But they didn't drive everybody out. They kind of made some deals here and there and kind of gave up, and so then they all kind of settled. And so now we come to this time frame that we refer to as the book of Judges. And what we see here is we're going to take a look at one person, Gideon. And maybe you've heard about him. He was a guy who went around to all the ancient inns and left Bibles for people. Not what happened, okay? But his story, and looking around, it represents the repeating cycle that we see in the book of Judges. And if you can kind of get that, there's this cycle that just keeps happening over and over again. And then these judges come up. If you've heard the name Samson is in the book of Gideon, or the book of Judges. So there's these number of different folks that come up and different stories. And some of them, quite frankly, are very, very violent, very icky. And it tells us what's kind of going on with the people. But let's pick up here. We're in chapter 6. It says, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. And for 7 years, he gave them into the hands of the Midianites. Because the power of Midian was so oppressive, the Israelites prepared shelters for themselves in mountain clefts, caves, and strongholds. Whenever the Israelites planted their crops, the Midianites, Amalekites, and other eastern peoples, people who lived on the other side of the Jordan, on the eastern side of the Jordan River, they would invade the country. They camped on the land, and they ruined the crops all the way to Gaza and did not spare a living thing for Israel, neither sheep, nor cattle, nor donkeys. They came up with their livestock and their tents like swarms of locusts. It was impossible to count them or their camels. They invaded the land to ravage it. Midian so impoverished the Israelites that they cried out to the Lord for help. And when the Israelites cried out to the Lord because of Midian, he sent them a prophet who said, and this is important, This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I brought you up out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. I rescued you from the hand of the Egyptians, and I delivered you from the hand of all your oppressors. I drove them out before you, gave you their land. I said to you, I am the Lord your God. Do not worship the gods of the Amorites, in whose land you live. But you have not listened to me. The angel of the Lord came, then we're told, and sat down under the oak in Ophrah that belonged to Joash the Abizarite, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress to keep it from the Midianites. When the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, the Lord is with you, mighty warrior. Now that's a very interesting phrase, because what we're going to see about Gideon is that he is really anything less, at least in his own eyes, than a mighty warrior. So here's the cycle that we see happening. First, there is sin. In this case, the Israelites were worshiping Baal. And then God disciplines them with servitude, in this case by the oppression of the Midianites and others. Then there is, and this is the way, these are the 4 words I learned, and hopefully they help you because they all start with S, and sometimes, that's helpful for us. There's supplication. They cried out to the Lord. And then there's salvation. Raising up a deliverer or a judge to free them from that oppression. And so we see this happen again and again. Sin, servitude, supplication, salvation. Let's say it all together so you begin to get this in your mind. There's sin, servitude, supplication, salvation. So how does God do this in this time? What's the salvation looking like? Well, we first see this, that God coaxed Gideon out of his fear. Gideon is not the bravest guy around that we're going to see. And he does this with a conversation, allowing Gideon to express his fears and his doubts. So he calls him, here you are, this brave warrior. And Gideon says, pardon me, my Lord, but if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all his wonders that our ancestors told us about when they said, did not the Lord bring us out of Egypt? But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of Midian. Now, I want you to get a sense of the time frame where we're at. It's been several generations since they were brought out of Egypt. When the Israelites were led through the desert, they always had a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. They had this presence. Once they crossed over the Jordan and into the promised land, that went away. So now all those stories are just that, just stories being handed down to them. They're not seeing for themselves God's activity. And so here's Gideon's fear. His first one we look at, number 1, we've been abandoned. We've been abandoned. Where are you? Where have you been? Maybe you felt that way from time to time, going through something really hard, painful, and you wonder, where's God? Well, I read about God doing all sorts of things in the Bible. Why is he not showing up for me? The Lord turned to him and said, go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you? In this, I see, here's God's response. We've been amazed. He said, well, I'm here now. I'm here now. Actually, I've always been here, but I'm here now. And we're going to do something together. That's not enough for Gideon. He says, pardon me, my Lord, but how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family. I'm nothing. Who am I to take on the Midianites? Who's going to follow me? Why would you pick me for this? And so his second fear is, I'm not strong enough. I don't know about you. Gideon is a guy I can really relate to, because these things, these doubts and fears, and looking at yourself and go, I can't do that. And maybe you felt that way too from time to time. Like, I can't. I'm not strong enough, smart enough, wise enough, knowledgeable enough, whatever it might be. You just tell yourself, I'm not enough. No one's following me. I can't accomplish anything. You need to remember, we're not enough. But our God is. And when we are cooperating with Him, we have all that we need. And so here's what the Lord said. I will be with you, and you will strike down all the Midianites, leaving none alive. So God's response, I'm going to be with you. Yeah, you're not enough, Gideon, but I am. And if I'm with you, you have all the strength and courage and power that you'll need if you'll just look to me. And so then Gideon, still not quite convinced, says, now, if I have found favor in your eyes, give me a sign that it is really you talking to me. Now, that feels real, doesn't it? Wouldn't you kind of, God's talking to me, is it the pepperoni pizza from last night? What's this all about? Please do not go away until I come back and bring my offering and set it before you. So here's his third fear. It's not really God speaking. I don't know who it is. But it can't be God. I have my doubts about that. The Lord said He would wait, so Gideon prepared an offering of goat, bread, and broth. And then the angel of God said to him, take the meat and the unleavened bread, place them on this rock, and pour out the broth. And Gideon did so. Then the angel of the Lord touched the meat and the unleavened bread with the tip of the staff that was in his hand. Fire flared from the rock, consuming the meat and the bread, and the angel of the Lord disappeared. When Gideon realized that it was an angel of the Lord, he exclaimed, alas, sovereign Lord, I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face. Now here's God's response. So what did he tell him? Is it really you? Watch this. Here's something for you. Watch this. And he makes it disappear, gets consumed. Now, Gideon then fears that he would die because he saw an angel of the Lord face to face, but he's told he would not. And in response, he built an altar to the Lord. As the narrative continues, we see this. God then calls Gideon to act. He called him to act. So that same night, the Lord said to him, take the second bull from your father's herd, the one 7 years old, tear down your father's altar to Baal and cut down the Asherah pole. So these are all signs of worshiping Baal, tools that they used. And then build a proper kind of altar to the Lord your God on the top of this height. Using the wood of the Asherah pole that you cut down, offer the second bull as a burnt offering. If you're old enough, or if you've seen the video, you might remember Ronald Reagan standing in front of the Berlin Wall and saying, tear down this wall. Here's God telling Gideon, tear down this altar. Tear it down. So Gideon took 10 of his servants and did as the Lord told him. But because he was afraid of his family and the townspeople, he did it at night rather than in the daytime. So Gideon responds, but it's a rather timid response. I'm going to obey you, Lord. I'm going to do what you've called me to do, but I'm going to do it in the dark where no one can see. No one will be able to blame me or come after me. Now, to illustrate how far from God the Gideon's neighbors were, when they saw it the next morning, they wanted to know who did it, and when they found out it was Gideon, they wanted to kill him. Isn't that something? Here are people who belong to the Lord, who are supposed to know His word and His law, who are supposed to be worshiping Him alone, and when somebody stepped in and took down one of their idols, their response was not, oh, you're right, we were wrong. They want to kill him. But his father refused to hand him over and said that if Baal was really God, he could defend himself, and said, okay. Then we read this in verse 33. Now all the Midianites, Amalekites, and other eastern peoples joined forces and crossed over the Jordan, and they camped in the valley of Jezreel. Then the Spirit of the Lord came on Gideon, and he blew a trumpet, summoning the Abiezrites to follow him. He sent messengers throughout Manasseh, calling them to arms, and also into Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali. So they too went up to meet them. So he's gathering this army. So here's God's command number 2. I want you to drive off the Midianites. That's what you're going to do. And Gideon said, though, to God, he said, if you will save Israel by my hand, as you have promised, look, I will place a wool fleece on the threshing floor. If there is dew only on the fleece and all the ground is dry, then I will know that you will save Israel by my hand, as you said. And that is what happened. Gideon rose early the next day. He squeezed the fleece and wrung out the dew, a bowl full of water. Now you would think at this point, okay, he's getting it. He's got a sign. But then Gideon said to God, now do not be angry with me. Let me make just one more request. You ever do that with your kids? I want you to do this. Well, how about if we get into this negotiation tactic and think, you're going to be a good lawyer someday. Let me make just one more request. Allow me one more test with the fleece, but this time, make the fleece dry and let the ground be covered with dew. That night God did so, only the fleece was dry and all the ground was covered with dew. So here we see Gideon's timid response again. He wants to obey. He's just so unsure. He said, give me a sign. I need a sign, or 2, actually. So God gives them these signs that he asked for. And do you see in that God's grace at work? Do you see God stepping into Gideon and just kind of coaxing him along and saying, okay. There's no big flare up. There's no, why don't you believe me? No threats. Just, okay, come on, Gideon. Come on into this. I take that as very good news for me. Times that I can be timid and doubtful, that you say, God is there going, come on. When you want to say, like somebody said to Jesus once, I believe, but help me in my unbelief. There's God saying, okay, come on. Come on. So early the next morning, Gideon led his men south of where the Midianites were encamped. And God told Gideon to send home anyone who was too afraid to be there, lest they think that in defeating the Midianites, they had done it themselves without God's help. 22,000 men responded when Gideon went around and said, listen, if you're trembling with fear, if you're too afraid to be here, you can go home. 22,000 left. Now, if I'm Gideon in that moment, I'm going, wait a minute. You know, I'm sure all those numbers kind of made him feel a little bold. But now, a little bit of doubts here. But there's more. There's more. The Lord said to Gideon, there are still too many men. Take them down to the water, and I will thin them out for you there. If I say, this one shall go with you, he shall go. But if I say, this one shall not go with you, he shall not go. And so here's another one of God's commands. I want you to winnow down your army. I don't want to leave any doubt in anyone's mind that it was me who did this, so that they will turn their hearts back to me. So what Gideon does is he took the men down to the water, and there the Lord told him, separate those who lap the water with their tongue as the dog laps from those who kneel down to drink. So you get some people who get down on all fours, and they just put their face right in the water, and then there were those who kind of used their hands and brought the water up to their mouths. The ones who got down and lapped the water got sent home. They wound up with 300 men ready for battle. And all the rest got down on their knees to drink. The Lord said to Gideon, with 300 men that lapped, I will save you and give the Midianites into your hands. Let all the others go home. So Gideon sent the rest of the Israelites home, but kept 300 who took over the provisions and trumpets of the others. So now we begin to see Gideon's confident response. Obedience. It would be easy to imagine Gideon going, wait a minute, whoa. We already lost 22,000 men here, Lord. You want me to send home more? But he's beginning to trust the Lord. He's beginning to move in to this thing as this strong warrior, this courageous warrior. He's beginning to inhabit that role. But God still seemed to know that deep within Gideon, there's still maybe some unexpressed fears and doubts. So God said, listen, Gideon, you may still be afraid. So what I want you to do, I want you to go down at night, down to the Midianite camp, and just listen and see what you hear. Listen to what you hear and see if that doesn't give you some courage. So he does that. He takes one of his servants, helpers with him, and he goes down and he listens. And he hears these two guys having a conversation. And one of them describes a dream to him about this big bale of barley that comes down and just wipes out their encampment. And the other one says, oh, that can only mean that Gideon's going to win tomorrow. We're going to lose. That's it for Gideon. Now he's ready. Now he's ready. So he gets everybody, gives them all torches, he gives them a little empty pitcher, and he gives them a trumpet. And then he said, listen, and he broke the men up into 100 groups, and they just kind of moved out around. He said, here's what we're going to do. I'll start it, you follow. I'm going to blow the trumpet. I'm going to they're going to keep their torches inside those little pots until the right moment. They're going to pull them out, and there's going to be this light, and they're going to say this, for the Lord and for Gideon. We're going to shout that, and they're going to do it in the middle of the night. They're just going to terrorize everybody. And that's exactly what happened. And the Midianites, they run into an absolute panic, and they run around. They're fighting each other, and those that survive that begin fleeing the area, and Gideon and his forces drive them off. And the end of it, and it goes on for a little bit about what happens after that, but for our purposes this morning, we see that Gideon comes back, and the Israelites say, be our king, be our ruler. You did such a magnificent job, Gideon. We're ready to follow you. And Gideon said, no. The Lord must rule over you. You have to learn to obey him. But then he did this. He asked for a gold earring from the plunder from each soldier, because some of those people that they fought against, that's what they wore, gold earrings. So they gave him that. And we're told that he made this gold, melted down, made it into an ephod, which is kind of a way of kind of discerning God's will, that's how it was used. And he placed it in order for his town. All Israel, then, we're told, prostituted themselves by worshiping it there. They still needed something to worship. And so they worshiped it. And it became a snare, we're told, to Gideon and his family. Folks, here's one of the things as you read through the Bible, we hear about these heroes of old. And we just think they are just astoundingly perfect people in their obedience and what they do. But what we see, and some people are surprised by this when they actually read the text, is just how messed up and easily tripped up these folks could be. And they could have a great success in one chapter and then fail miserably in another. And Gideon is no exception. And he should have said, no, we're not worshiping this. But he's like, yeah, all right. All right. And his success became his snare. And you'll see that over and over and over again with the different people that we look at. Like, wow, they really got it this one time. But then they did not end well. And we're told this, thus Midian was subdued before the Israelites and did not raise its head again. During Gideon's lifetime, the land had peace for 40 years. But no sooner had Gideon died than the Israelites again prostituted themselves to the Baals. They set up Baal-berith as their god and did not remember the Lord their God, who had rescued them from the hands of all their enemies on every side. And so we see that Gideon's death just restarts that cycle all over again. What is it? Sin, servitude, supplication, salvation. They just, as soon as Gideon's out of the picture, boom, they're back into the sin part. And if you go to the end of the book of Judges, you read this, the very last sentence. And this covers decades, several numbers of years. It says, in those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as they saw fit. Now this sets up what's going to happen that we begin reading about in 1 Samuel. And we're going to begin to get to that after. We're going to kind of take a little pause on what we're doing here for a few Christmas messages. But then we'll pick up the story again. But here's what I want us to take away. Gideon's story has some lessons for us. It's not just, it is an ancient story. There's some things there, but it has some lessons for us. Here's one of them. Every generation needs their own encounter with God. I think that's still true today. You know, there are some people, maybe you look at your family, you were maybe the first one that really came into the faith. And it was bold and strong within you, and you were sold out to it. And then comes the next generation, and they're learning from you, but they're just kind of hitchhiking on your faith. They have to have their own moment, come to Jesus moment, quite literally, to where they go, yes, I believe there is a God. I believe the God that exists is the God that is revealed to us in the Bible, and I will follow him. Without that moment, without that decision, all we have is just kind of laws, do as I say type of stuff. People have to have that own encounter, that own moment for themselves. Here's another lesson. We see it not just in Gideon, but for all this. God graciously meets us at our fears. And you'll see this theme pop up time and time again throughout Scripture. We're afraid, we're unsure, we're doubtful, and God in his grace meets us in that. And I believe that's still true to this day. You may have doubts. You may have uncertainties. Is God really with us? Is God really with me? What's going on in my life? Now, we need to make sure we're not putting our hopes in promises God's word never gives us. But we do need to know, is this a God who is with us no matter what we face? Because remember, the promise is presence. Presence. It's not, I'll never encounter anything bad or hard or painful. It's his presence through the stuff of this life. And he'll meet us at our fears if we'll just turn to him and look to him and say, God, I'm scared. I'm doubtful. I'm unsure. I don't know. God doesn't cross his arms and say, well, you faithless little being. Well, he'll meet you in that moment and coax you into a deeper faith. Another lesson that we see here is that we need transformation, not just obligation. By the time we get around to Gideon's generation, just obligation. They had the law, but that law could not hold them. They just turned away from it. Unless our hearts are changed, we do not do well in the long run from mere exterior compulsions. That is somebody telling us, this is how you must be. And we're like, oh, okay. And at first we're afraid and we're going to do all the right things. But after a while, we're not so afraid. And so we just go do whatever we want to do. And as the scripture said, we do whatever's right in our own eyes. There has to be an inner transformation. That's that meeting God for each of us ourselves. That transformation that I want to do this, not out of fear, not out of obligation, but out of love. I'm doing this because I want to. But here's the best news of all. Jesus took our fears, our failures, to the cross. You might be looking back at your life and you might say, I can start a long list of times I was afraid. I knew what maybe God wanted me to do. I saw it in his word, but I was afraid. Or I just did what I wanted to do and I failed. I did not live up to what I wanted to do, and I definitely didn't live up to what God is calling me toward, and I failed. That's what the cross is about, folks. It's taking all those fears and taking all that failure and not holding it against you, but taking it onto the cross, and he receives all that sin onto himself. He satisfies the obligations of the law, all at the cross, so that you and I can live in peace with God, knowing that what surrounds us is not judgment, but grace. And when we take that little piece of bread that we do every week and that little cup of juice, that's what I want you to see. I want you to see your fears, your failures. Get whatever ones you got maybe going in your mind and say, they're done. They've been taken to the cross. They've been abolished. They're not going to be held against me anymore because I believe that Jesus Christ's death was enough. And his burial and his resurrection has overcome sin and death. And I am free. I am free to walk in faith and peace and love, not only with God, but with other people. Will you pray with me? Our Heavenly Father, I thank you for a story like Gideon. Someone who wanted to do what was right, but was too often afraid. But you met him in that moment and used him. Father, most of us in here won't be delivering any people in any battles or anything like that. But we all have something that we can be afraid of. Or we can be too timid. And we need you to coax us out of those fears. Meet us in this moment right now, Father, as we remember what Christ did with our fears and our failures at the cross. And in his name I pray, amen.